Hey everyone, welcome to Wildlife Inspired. I'm your host, Scott Keys. Today we're going to talk about the complete image and how to improve your bird photography by seeing through the subject right after this. For several years, I've used the expression see through the subject. And today we're going to talk about what that actually means. And I'm going to give you a few tips on how to improve your bird photography, especially if you're moving from that beginner stage into that intermediate stage. So you've figured out your camera, maybe you've got some good locations, you know where the birds are at. This tip can really help you improve your photography and move it out of that beginner and amateur stage and start making your images really improved. So we're going to talk a little bit today. I've got a lot of examples to show you. And I want to just explain a couple things before we get into the video. And that is testing the site. So before we even start taking pictures, I know you've done this. I've got memory cards where I come home, I download the images, and there's branches and there's perches. Now, some of that's because I missed the bird. The bird flew away and I missed the shot. But often case, those are test shots. And I'm not testing for exposure. I'm actually testing to see what it looks like. Remember, the human eye is very, very different than the lenses, especially that we use for bird photography. Think about a couple of things. One, our field of view. So the angle that we can see at through the human eye is roughly 120 degrees. So pretty wide. When you put that 400, 500, or 600 millimeter lens on, you get a compressed field of view. It's very, very, very narrow relative to your human eye. So when you're out looking at an area and you're even thinking about where to set up or how to set up, it's often helpful just to take some shots and see what it looks like from the field of view. The other thing, depth of field. If I would challenge you to go focus on an object about 10 or 20 feet away and then look behind it without changing your focus, you will actually be able to see details of things that are 50 or 100 feet behind where you're focused. Now, if you did the same thing with a 400 or 500 millimeter lens, you will not be able to see the details 50 to 100 feet behind when you're focused 10 or 20 feet away. There's an incredibly different depth of field that our eyes have than the cameras that we're using are going to have. So depth of field and the field of view are extremely different. So just going out and shooting some test shots of perches will often give you an idea of what you're working with. What's the background separation? What do the perches look like themselves? What is the light like? And I'll use those test shots to help determine where I'm going to set up in the areas I'm going to set up. Especially with bird photography, we don't always get to choose where they land. So often, especially if we're doing it out in the field, less in a controlled environment. So I'm not talking about the setup perches where we're attracting birds to one specific perch, but when you're out in the field, it's often very, very helpful. So before we get into anything else, I just want to put that out there. Take some test shots, see what they look like, and try to put yourself into the area that you think is going to photograph well. You're just increasing your chances, if a bird actually comes in, of getting some really nice images. Now for today's video, I'm going to show you a lot of images. Let me switch over to this view. I've got a Flickr album. If you head over to Flickr, S-Keys Images, you're going to see an album dedicated to this specific video. So this video is part 1 of 2. This one's called Seeing Through the Subject, and part 2 is going to be the sweet spot of bird photography. Both concepts related, but I'm going to deal with that second subject in a little bit more detail in another video. So look for the card above if it's been posted. But today we're going to talk about seeing through the subject. Now up on the screen, I've got an indigo bunting. Now before I took any pictures of birds this day, I promise you I was testing some of the areas, just taking some snapshots, seeing what the light was like. Again, not just for exposure, but also what's the best background? Do I have good clearance here? Are the perches at a good height for me? So shooting in this sunflower field was really ideal because the perches are just about eye level. Now I'm lucky here that an indigo bunting is not a bird that will bounce around all over the place. They like to actually perch and sing. I think I got another indigo bunting in this video as well, because they are good subjects once they're perched to use this concept of seeing through the frame. And on this particular image, I do remember seeing that the bird was on that green part of the background. And I really wanted to see if I could get a different look. Now, I've already given you one tip about taking some test shots and perches. The second tip I'm going to give you here is before you move, which is going to be some of the advice in this video, but before you move, get some keeper shots. So before I'm thinking of the perfect shot, I'm going to get some, because if I move and the bird flies away, I've lost everything. So once I get those keeper shots, once I get a few good, clean frames, Now my brain instantly switches modes. I've got the shot. Now I'm going to challenge the shot, and I'm going to look through the frame. Even as the camera's up to my eye and my eye's through the viewfinder, I'm looking at all of the spaces on the edges. I'm looking for distractions behind the bird. So for example, if a stick is going through this bird's head or body, can I move a little to the right or a little bit to the left to clear those distractions? The other thing I'm going to look at in the background is, do I have some color or some interest back there that I can take advantage of? In this case, those yellow sunflowers were a little bit more appealing to me. And if you like the green, maybe you move to the green. But in this case, I moved away from the green background, and just by sliding over a little bit in one direction, I'm able to reorient the angle and line up the indigo bunting into the yellow. So I thought that was a pretty good example of how you could just move a little bit left and a little bit right. So I gave you a couple tips already. Number one, taking some test shots when you get to the site, seeing what it looks like, what the environment looks like. Number two was to get some keepers before you do any type of movement. And I'm going to give you another tip here, which is to help you move in the field. So especially if you know you're in a situation where you're shooting, say, songbirds that might move around a little bit, or you might have backgrounds that you can't control, try a monopod. Now, I've done videos on monopods for a long time. I've got a lot of videos on tripods out there, some of the reviews, but especially for songbirds, I find monopods, they just give you the ability to move a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right. They also give you the ability to change your perspective up or down. So if I want to drop down a little bit or move up, it's much easier to use than a tripod. And it's a little bit more stable than just hand holding. So if you are comfortable hand holding and your camera can handle that, feel free to hand hold. But when you get to shutter speeds under 500th of a second, it becomes a little bit more challenging to get those sharp photos when you are hand holding. So if you don't own a monopod, give it a try, but especially when I'm out in the field with songbirds, I am using a monopod almost all the time. Now, the other thing I want to ask you is, what if I took the bird away from this? Would the image still be appealing? And this is a test I use in some of my images. So I went ahead and actually did it for this video. I removed the bird. So in Photoshop, I took the bird out and I looked at this picture to see, is it still something that's pleasing? And while I wouldn't print this and put it on my wall, you can see it has a really soft tone. The color palette is really nice. And I would say overall that image is really, really pleasing. Let's take a couple other images here. I'm going to look at this horned lark. Now, the applied learning that I wanted to put into this video was there were a lot of horned larks around. And I could have shot any of them. But I had a small window where the sky was just starting to open up. And the sun here is actually just below the horizon. So we're in what we call blue hour. If I had shot the birds that were on the ground, I would have had white backgrounds with very little color. So seeing through the subject, I actually just focused on this one little lump of snow, because there I could get the background colors that I wanted. Now, I shot this in a horizontal composition, and with a high megapixel camera, one of the advantages is you can then crop it in and get a vertical composition out of it. But notice I kept the subject toward the bottom of the frame, and that was intentional because I was trying to get as much of the color in there as possible. Now, I could have also gone into a portrait, so I could have turned my camera into a portrait orientation, and I could have tried to capture it that way. But in this case, with the birds moving around, I was kind of locked into what I wanted to do, and I was trying to get a horizontal composition out of this with a lot of the sky, but I opted for the vertical. And well, the key learning though was I was focused on this area because even without the subject, I had really, really pretty colors in the background. A couple more concepts of just shooting before the subject shows up. I show up at this location, it's fall, it's sunrise, and I'm taking some test shots and I'm looking for the patterns in the background. Are they nice and out of focus? Do I have interesting colors? What's it look like? Now, this is migration. I cannot predict where this bird is going to land. All I can do is increases my chances of the best possible image by staying in the spot that has the best, in this case, the best background colors. If I start chasing those birds around, I'm at their mercy. So yes, there may be a bird over here. And if I leave to go over there, I don't know what that looks like. So I typically find my area, and I could move a few feet to the left or right. This area is going to look the same, but I find my area, especially during migration, and I wait for something to show up. And in this case, I got lucky. It was right at sunrise. I really, really like these fall colors in the background. I think that golden glow really does this one well. So seeing through the subject, I'm actually shooting this area before anything shows up, and I'm just looking at the background and the light. A couple more just quick stories on this one. This is a Louisiana water thrush. They like to sing in one place. So when they perch on a branch, they will often stay there as long as you don't scare it. This water thrush hangs out right off of a dirt road on either side. As I was driving my car by, I heard him. I stopped the car. There he was. Now, the interesting thing is, generally I will turn the car off because I don't want to scare the bird. In this case, I actually left the car running. I quickly tried to get my camera. When your car is running, there's vibration there, so be very careful. If you rest your camera on the car, you may get some vibration right on the camera. So I'm hand holding this out the window, and I'm not quite getting the composition I want. In this case, the background was clean, and I think one of those little clusters of leaves was behind the bird. It didn't really look right. So I actually put the car in reverse. I just backed up a little, or in this case, I think I pulled forward a little bit so that I could get that composition that I wanted, so that there was one little cluster of leaves over the head and one little cluster in front. The bird sat there. He was fine. I was fine. I got my pictures. Eventually he left and I kept driving down the road. It was really, really neat experience because it was very spontaneous. But once I got those keeper shots, once I got a few, he's singing, he's sitting on the branch. Once I got those shots, I started to challenge. Can I do anything from here? And because I was in my car, I knew if I opened the door, I lose them. So I just pull up a little bit and I get that composition, seeing through the frame. Another example of just moving a little left or a little right to get the composition, seeing through the frame. I'm in a field of goldenrod in the fall. This is a Lincoln sparrow. You could see that foreground goldenrod and the background goldenrod. All it took was just moving a little bit left or a little bit right. And now look at, again, how it's channeled in the same way as that other image. But in this case, one of the lines is created from the background. One of the angles is created from the foreground. And I've got them nestled into those two really lovely patches of goldenrod. Seeing through the subject, slight adjustments in the field. Again, that one tip I gave you, get your keeper shot first. Get a shot that's clean and in focus, and you've got like kind of that standard portrait. And as soon as that happens, as soon as you get it, challenge everything that's going on in the frame. Forget the subject. You've got the subject. You know, what's interesting is once our cameras acquire focus on the subject, we as photographers don't have a lot left to do except alter the lighting and composition and change our angles. Most of the time, the camera is going to stay focused where it was. So if, again, you got your shot, move a little left, move a little right. These meadows that I photograph sometimes, often before this bird appeared, I photograph this area. Again, I just set up and I take a couple shots. I see what it looks like. I look through the viewfinder. I find an area that I think will present well. And with common birds like common yellowthroats in this field sparrows, they are generally pretty available. And I feel pretty good that if I'm in a good spot, one of them could land there. Now, I have been there many times and got nothing. But I would much rather go 3 or 4 times to get this shot, which I really like, as opposed to get a shot every time where I'm chasing a bird, it's looking the wrong way, there's sticks in the background, the light isn't right. I would much rather get fewer shots in the areas that I choose that look really, really great. So tip number 1, the first tip I gave you, when you show up to an area, especially if you're out in the field, take a couple shots, see what they look like through the lens without the subject there. Literally seeing through the subject because the subject is no longer there. Little smaller in frame. I use this image as an example in one of my videos on small in frame photography. This bird sat there for minutes. It was incredible. We were far enough away that and we were at an odd angle. We were up on a cliff and it's kind of down almost below us. You can see I'm actually shooting down on it a little bit. And it was just very comfortable. I think it knew we were there, but didn't move. We had a lot of opportunity to change perspective. So I actually remember lowering down a little bit because I was shooting down on them, getting even lower and trying to get as much of that background. Those were spring leaves, getting a little bit of sunlight, dappled light through the woods. I thought it was really pretty. And I'm also able now to compose in frame. So again, I'm looking through the frame and now I'm going to, in camera, compose that warbler all the way down to the right so that I get the entire perch. Now, I'm not the most gorgeous perch in the world, but I'm able to get that entire perch in frame and have it end in frame, which is a style that I really like. I try to get as much of that done in the field as I can. And if not, I can certainly try to crop it to make it work. So this is an image that I really, really liked. Another one, you know, if I remove the bird, which I did, is it a pretty scene? I think so. I love the colors, these complementing colors, and then the bird, just a part of it. A lot of the composition done in the field, again, in these tight windows and these meadows, using that monopod, a little left, little right, little up, little down. And I get those keeper shots, and now I'm just looking at everything else. I'm recomposing in camera where I can and really trying to maximize the environment. Here's another one, pretty simple, pretty light. Take away the bird, it's still pretty. That's still pretty. A couple more. I did a lot of songbirds for this video because that's where I think I personally apply this concept the most. But I'll give you a couple other examples. This is a short-eared owl. I think a lot of the temptation with certain subjects is to get closer all the time. Again, revisit my video on small and frame photography. But sometimes when you're a little looser with your compositions and the subjects are a little smaller, it really does give you an opportunity to kind of see the scene. And here I'm moving. I actually have a tripod in this one, and I'm lifting my tripod up. This owl's pretty far away. I'm lifting my tripod up and I'm moving it here, and then I'm lifting it up and I'm moving it here, and I'm trying to get it right. And I'm also like trying to get that owl so that he's sitting just at the top of the trees. I couldn't go too much higher or lower with this guy. It wouldn't have made that much of a difference, but I remember tweaking a little bit, and he's not moving. Like, he's just sitting there. So these static subjects, whereas the songbirds, you don't always have as much of a chance. If they're singing, you might have a better chance because they like to perch and sing. But with some subjects, like this short-eared owl, I could have done whatever I wanted to this thing in terms of composition. And I got a composition that I liked, keeping those trees on the left, kind of centering the subject on that tree line. And I thought this one was pretty nice. I think I finish with, I've got a couple more. The shorebirds. This one, before sunrise, I remember there was a flock of these black-bellied plovers. And sometimes it's tempting when there's a lot of subjects. You know, which one do I choose? Which one do I work with? In this case, they were pretty oblivious to me. I was there while they were sleeping. I just kind of laid next to them for a while, waited for the sun to come up. So they weren't startled by me. And that's a different tip for a different day about how to approach wildlife. But when I looked through the frame, all I wanted was that bokeh in the background. That's created, by the way, the sun is rising behind me, and it's hitting the far shoreline, a building or a structure with some glass on it, and that's the reflection of the sun. And it was really, really beautiful, but that's what I wanted. So I move, I get a couple shots, and I move, and I get a couple shots, and I keep moving and adjusting. So I'm getting keepers as I go. So if I don't get the shot, the real shot that I want, I probably got something close. And eventually I was able to move enough to my left that I was able to get his head and his body right in that little area of light that I wanted. So again, an image that I think is pretty. I've just got a couple more images here. I want to just mention this real quickly. Seeing through the subject, the key is getting that far background, that inlet on the other side. I want to get that into the picture. Now, it becomes very, very challenging in a situation like this. I've had people ask me, how do you do this? I'm not in the water for this, and I don't encourage people to kind of get really low near the ocean, because those waves can come up. You can get one random wave and it can wipe you out. It can take out your equipment. And if you're not careful, it could take you into the ocean. And you know, this is the winter. You don't want to be in the ocean in winter in choppy water, fully dressed. Like, that is not a healthy situation. So I'm a little bit more careful than what it might look. I'm in a position, and what I'm doing is I really do want that background. I'm seeing through the subject. I know the background that I want. I'm trying to get my camera lower. So I'm using the flip up screen, and then I'm waiting for that duck to crest. So you see how that crest is there? The crest is out in front of me. I'm still shooting down a little bit, but that's the secret here. If that duck was at normal water level, then I'd be shooting down into the water and you wouldn't see the far shoreline. So again, seeing through the subject, I know what I want. And in that case, that's how I'm achieving it here. Last image. If I were to take the loon out of this, it's still moody. I converted this to black and white. It wasn't much of a conversion because the colors were pretty drained out from the misty conditions, but a really pretty image. Again, a little smaller in frame, and I'm seeing through the subject, and I'm waiting. I'm looking at that background. This is going to lead us into part two. This is the last image for part one. Part two is going to talk about the sweet spot. And I thought this image is a nice transition between this video and the next one. But looking at that background, seeing through the subject, and then determining, when do I want to shoot? What's the right frame to capture without wasting 100,000 frames and picking one? So after I got a couple, I knew where I wanted this loon. I almost said duck. This loon, I knew where I wanted that loon to be because I'm seeing through the subject. I'm looking at the background. Now all I have to do is maintain focus, wait for the loon to get into the right spot, or I'm in a kayak, or adjust my position a little bit. So move a little bit more forward or a little bit more backwards if that loon is kind of in the same spot, not moving. So in this video, I gave you a couple tips to help you out with this. So tip number one was, when you show up at a location, just take some test shots. Remember, your human eye is much different than the lenses that we're using for wildlife photography and for bird photography. So what is it going to look like? And can you put yourself in the best possible area based off of the angle of the light, the number of distractions, where the best perches are? Are you really committing yourself to the best area and not really chasing the birds? So limiting your area to the best possible area to photograph. Tip number two was, just once you get those keeper, get that keeper, get that sharp focus, in focus bird on the stick, wherever it is, and then challenge everything. Challenge the composition. Can I move it left and right in frame? Should I move myself a little left or a little right, or a little up or a little down? How can I minimize distractions and maximize the backgrounds and the foregrounds? And tip number three was, again, getting back to that movement. The equipment that you use can help you with that. So if you're hand holding, that's great. Be very careful as you get slower shutter speeds. Some of the newer camera bodies really help out with that. The noise, the vibration reduction, or the in-camera stabilization. Those things can be really, really helpful. But slower shutter speeds handheld can be a problem. And that's where a monopod gives you the best of both worlds. It's almost as mobile as hand holding, and it gives you a little bit of stability like a tripod. It's kind of the best of both worlds. You don't get quite as much of either, but it's the best combination. And I find it especially useful for songbirds. Hope you enjoyed today's video. Now remember, in part two, I'm going to be talking about the sweet spot of bird photography. I'll be using a lot of waterfowl examples, and I'm actually going to show you right out of my camera what it looks like and what I'm focused on when I'm in the field. So stay tuned for that video. If you don't want to miss these videos, go down to notifications, hit the little bell, and then as soon as I drop a video, you get a notification. I don't release a lot of videos, so you're not going to get too many notifications. And of course, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. As always, thanks for your support. Hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think down in the comments, and I hope we can continue to find inspiration in wildlife together.